I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Director, it's today and rather good evening.
You know, there's a new thing out in Hollywood now, though, Milt, if I may suggest it to you.
Yeah.
In fact, we do all these shows on film.
On film.
And then we put in what we call a laugh track on the side. Call them canned laughs.
Canned laughs?
Canned laughs, that's right here. I brought along a can right here.
Oh, yeah?
I was going to be on your show. I thought maybe you'd use them.
You
right.
buy these by the can, eh? Well,
That's right.
how does it work? How does it work?
Well, you see, if you want a little laugh...
Is it a good thing?
It's a wonderful thing. If you want a little laugh...
Yeah?
You open it just a little ways, you see? Now, watch. Now, if you want...
Hey, this is a boon. This is a boon to writers.
Boon to writers.
Get
It's the
rid of
biggest thing to comics since writers.
What
That's
happened?
right.
You want a bigger laugh?
Bigger laugh, you open a little wider.
Beautiful.
You like that, Milt? Now, if you want what they call a yucca-beanie.
A big scream.
A real kind of a screamer,
Yeah.
you go...
I gave Charlie Douglas all the tracks that were from my early shows in the late 40s and the early 50s, all the laugh tracks, and he put them in the machine. So I'd say to this day, the comedians, or comics, whatever you want to call them, are still getting laughs, but they're my laughs.
It's people who have been dead, some of them, for many years, comes out of a machine now. Few programs go through the motions of having a few people there to laugh, but most of the laughter is canned laughter.
Very funny, Bilko, but I'm the one that's laughing. Take a look at this. $96.
Situating comedies are characters, the interplay of characters, and what you do, if you're going to justify the term at all, is you invent a situation which leads to a conflict between interesting characters.
How is it, Terry, that you always loom so large in all my misfortunes?
What a terrible thing to say.
How is it, Terry, that you are always the cause of my grief and anguish?
What a terrible thing to say. Now drink that while it's hot.
Bloody hell! Bloody hell!
It's become the bread and butter of television. Most networks, I mean, more so in America, but in England too, want a successful situation comedy. It becomes a program around which they can program the rest of the evening.
Beryl?
Yes, Geoffrey?
Would you care to rip my trousers off and have your way with me?
Honestly, your sense of humour and interesting mind.
Beryl, I could eat you, even in oil.
Oh, Jeffy Bubbles Bumble.
Oh, Beryl.
Oh, Jeffy.
Oh, Beryl.
I thought you loved me.
Well?
Well, that wasn't love.
It wasn't flipping friendship.
People don't mind bad drama from time to time, and they don't even talk about it. But a bad joke or a bad situation comedy scene is something that no one can live with.
What was that?
One for the road.
Situation comedy was born in America. Its roots lie in vaudeville and radio. The television networks hoped that the top comedy stars of radio would entice the American public to the new medium.
So I looked at people who were so good in radio that I thought they'd also be good in television. So by 1948, when things started up, we had some very good material to work with. They gave us a marvelous start in television.
Oh, hello, Gracie. Hello, Blanche.
Despite the living room setting, an image that has come to characterize much television comedy, the Burns and Allen show was not a true situation comedy. Burns' asides to camera betrayed its vaudeville roots.
Maybe I should have gotten the wristwatch.
I Love Lucy was a great success on radio. And Lucille Ball was a great comedian, one of the best I've ever known. And we were trying to induce her to go to television.
Lucy, this is not night to play games with!
Like George and Gracie, Lucy and Desi were husband and wife off-screen as well as on. When Lucille Ball became pregnant, the event was incorporated into the television series, and 44 million Americans tuned in to see Lucy Goes to Hospital.
In the case of Lucy, you had broader kinds of comedy. You had slapstick, you had farce. The pie-in-the-face comedy will travel because a pie is a pie no matter where it is, although in France it probably tastes a lot better.
There's a misconception that all the great comedy comes from burlesque. It isn't true. It comes from burlesque if you know how to sift it. I mean, when in Rome, I was as dirty as the next guy, double entendre. But I knew all the time that it was not the way to do it.
Never mind the $1.90. This dime will get us dinner.
Who you calling, Sarge?
Remember Hilda? The fat one? Yes, she's fat, which only means she eats good. And I understand she does her own cooking. Let me handle it. You can't be too particular. So what if a dame is a little fat and a little sloppy? Hello! Hilda, how are you, darling? This is Zany Boy. Yes, some friends of mine and I were in the neighborhood. We thought we'd give you a buzz, as they say. You want us to come right over? Well, after all, Hilda, it is dinner time. We do hate to barge in on you like this. You're not having dinner. You're on a diet? Well, if you think it's for your appearance, it's all right. Beep, beep. Oh, there's the bus. We must run. Thank you very much, Hilda. Take care.
I'm a very impatient comedian, and I feel the audience is as impatient as I am. I couldn't take time out to learn in a half-hour show to learn the proper commands. Like, for instance, close order drill. I would say, and a close order drill happened. We had soldiers going into the army, soldiers coming out of the army, soldiers been in the army. So we had a homemade audience. It was so well written that it's endless. There'll always be an army, and there'll always be a guy in business for himself.
How's it going?
Just great. Hey, best sketch we ever wrote.
Not so good, huh?
Rotten.
Hey, Laura, why don't you sit in? We could use some new ideas. No, Rob doesn't think I'm a very good writer.
I didn't say that.
Oh, well then what does the word stinks mean?
In retrospect, I suppose some people would call it a "Hi, honey, I'm home" show, but in those days it was a little different in that it examined what the husband did for a living.
Look, Rob, you got a sketch to finish. Buddy and Sally would like to work.
Forget the work. I'd rather watch you fight.
Shut up.
One of the highest compliments I ever got for our show was that my wife, on seeing the first few episodes, said it was eerie to her because it was she identified with it. It was the same thing that happened at home. She couldn't see the difference in my behavior at home and on the show.
No, it's not a fight. It's a little difference of opinion.
Right.
For that day, which was 1960 to 65, I think there was more of a hint of a sexuality between the husband and wife than there had been on other shows.
Personal here, we just would like to get an objective opinion to settle this thing. All right, I like both stories.
Yeah, me too. It's a hung jury. Next case.
Now, the Mary Tyler Moore Dick Van Dyke Show, which was then called the Dick Van Dyke Show, and nobody knew who Mary Tyler Moore was, failed at 8 o'clock Tuesday night because I made the mistake of putting it there. I thought it was so strong, it would be a success in itself. Well, that was nonsense. I put it behind the Beverly Hillbillies, which was the #1 show on television then, and an entirely different audience appeal. It didn't make any difference. That year, the Dick Van Dyke, Mary Tyler Moore show went from 48th place to 2nd place.
The Beverly Hillbillies was America's most popular television show in its debut year, 1962. Its success spawned a succession of so-called rural comedies like Green Acres, the story of a sophisticated city couple living in the rural backwater of Hooterville, already the home of Billy Joe, Bobby Joe, Betty Joe, and Uncle Joe of Petticoat Junction. The decade also saw the situation comedy family escape into supernatural hokum with Bewitched, The Munsters, and The Addams Family.
The genre was burned out, and the people were ready for something different. That something different was the truth in comedy, the satire of making fun of bigotry and hate and racial discrimination.
All right, let's get to the point, huh? Lionel, what he wants to know is if you think he's prejudiced. Prejudiced?
Yeah. Against who?
Against black people.
Against black people? Mr. Bunker? Well, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard.
There, you see that nice guy?
You thought you knew him, you thought you knew me. Oh, these liberals. They're supposed to be so sensitive, you know? Well, I'll tell you where this guy's sensitive, Lionel, right in his tuchus.
All in the Family was definitely breakthrough television. Norman Lear really did change American television. They started dealing with real things, real issues, real people.
The shows reflected what we all of us who wrote and directed and produced and so forth, what we were feeling, what we were looking at, what we were observing in our society, what we were learning from our kids and our wives and husbands, and we were reflecting our times, but funny.
When your father was visiting last year, wasn't his name Davy or something?
My father's name was David.
David, right. And what was your mother's name? It was Sarah.
Sarah, yeah, my mother's name is Sarah, so what?
David and Sarah, 2 Jewish names.
David and Sarah, 2 names right out of the Bible, which has got nothing to do with the Jews.
As long as you guys keep eating them.
They sure are good, Mom.
All in the Family was a radical break from the bland, middle-class base of much American situation comedy. And it came about because of the way British television comedy developed. But in the early days, Britain looked to America.
At one time, Ronnie Waldman, the then head of Light Entertainment, called all the available writers to a meeting at the BBC, and he said, we have to have situation comedy in this country. And I'll show you what I mean. And he put on what was then called a kinescope of a show called Ozzie and Harriet.
The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, starring the entire Nelson family, Ozzie, Harriet, David, and Ricky.
The problem with doing situation comedy at that time was, people forget this, we were very much more class stratified. You couldn't get the thing that the Americans had, which was instant identification with the characters. That was American middle class. The difference between us and America was that even people living in tar shacks in the hills of Kentucky could happily watch that and laugh at it, because even if they didn't live like that, they knew they could and they aspired to.
Can I do you now, sir?
Like America, early British television comedy was drawn from radio.
Proud and happy boy.
And radio comedy was dominated by a handful of performers, most of whom had graduated from music hall.
The radio shows were built on the propagation of the central character. 90% of the time, they worked under their own name. I mean, Hancock was Hancock and Jimmy Edwards was Professor Edwards. And the job of the writers then was to push a personality. And that went into...
When we went to change from Hancock's half-hour from radio to television, people used to say, you've got to be visual. You've got to be on television, now you've got to be visual, and move about. And we didn't. We still had them sitting around just talking. Ray and I were more interested in the characters, really, than the situation. The situation is obviously important and obviously a great source of inspiration, but for us the character was the most important thing, and in Steptoe and Son that came later.
You dirty old man! What are you doing? I'm having me glass and they're having me dinner.
What are you doing with them onions?
Oh, they fell in the water.
Well, you don't put them back in the jar, then.
You don't think I'm going to leave them in the water, do you? I can't wash in a bath full of pickled onions, can I?
You should be eating your dinner in the bath. The bath is for washing in. You bath in the bath and you eat your dinner at the dinner table. You're getting worse, you are. Come on, give them a zero. Come on.
Oop, there's another one here.
Best influence that it ever had, I think, was on the language. When you got people like Galton and Simpson, whose writing is on a par with Pinter's and should be set for O levels, as in the way that it captures the idiom of people's speech and the poetry of people's speech. That was the best thing that television comedy did.
For the first time, you had very real comedy, but there was a very fine line because you were going into tragedy. halfway along and coming back into comedy. And there being junk men, I think, was almost incidental, that the thing was about a relationship.
Well, whichever way you look at it, to fish pickled onions out of your bathwater and put them back in the jar is an act of extreme dirtiness. Dirty, dirty.
What we were after was to get the reality of the thing. And I think under those circumstances, we did a breakthrough, followed up by Till Death, I mean, off Garnet, and yet he, unless he'd used some of the language which he did, would have not been believable.
I'll get this in the oven. You have a drink and sit.
It won't go in the oven.
Oh, find a way,
Of course you will, of course you will. Anybody could except her.
Look, we'll never eat it all anyway.
Oh, blimey, I'm beginning to wish I never bought a bloody thing now. I mean, there's people that give their right arms to have a turkey like that. Do you know what? There's some people today lucky if they've only got a bit of mincemeat to sit down to.
Be less bother.
I think John's concept, among other things, was to imbue this man with every conceivable sin, bigotry, prejudice, liar, coward, greedy, selfish, whatever, and more or less put him on the sort of public pillory of shame and say, oi, people, you shouldn't be like this, it's wrong.
To me personally, I mean, the character as I originally conceived him, that kind of character in society, I personally despised, hated, loathed. I'd lived among them a long, long time. The funny thing was, though, that as I wrote him and as Warren performed him, and that we grew to love him or like him, you know, and as a complete idiot.
Now, chat about it, Mr. Bunker. There's nothing to be ashamed of being Jewish.
But I ain't Jewish.
Look at that. Look at that. See the way he uses his hands when he argues? Huh? Very Semitic gesture.
What do you know about it, you dumb Polak?
Norman Lear bought the American rights of Till Death Us Do Part in 1968. But it took him 3 years to persuade the nervous television networks that America was ready for Archie Bunker.
Now, there you are, Mr. Bunker. Now, you ought to be proud you're Jewish.
But I ain't Jewish.
I didn't know you was Jewish.
What the hell are you talking about?
And they did get a lot of telephone calls, but they were surprised that many of the calls were positive, and that no state seceded from the Union. Their worst fears were not realized, and I think we all learned together that, not to the point where they never harassed again and didn't fight about content again, but they learned that, that America was far more grown up than they had thought.
All in the Family was acceptable. It was breakthrough, but I guess it was tame enough not to cause a lot of, people's noses to get out of joint. Soap, there was an awful lot of pre-publicity to soap that had people frightened before they even saw it. Stations were yanking it off the air before it even got on the air.
Now, I know we're a strange bunch, an eccentric bunch, a crazy bunch, but we're not a bad bunch. There isn't a one among us who would harm a soul.
Madam, I'm not accusing your family of being killers. I'm only saying...
There is one. I cannot tell a lie. There is one killer in the family.
It's the day-to-day life that covers, I suppose, incest and possession, homosexuality, infidelity, marrying in the priesthood, having extramarital relationships, just those basic things that families deal with every day.
I guess it was kind of a satire on the form of soap operas, but then it really became its own soap opera.
Are you the new man in her life?
Yes, are you crazy, you and him?
Hey, what the hell? It's 1980 and I'm a liberal guy.
But let me tell you, my man, you have got one hell of a fight on your hands.
Agony was heavily influenced by soap. Soap gave us the chance to do things in Agony that we wanted to do anyway, and nobody had said could be done before.
It's all right, darling. It's only Gudrun. She's giving birth all over the spare bedroom. Quite all right, darling. I can cope.
Michael, the phone.
There have been attempts at presenting gay characters on the screen in situation comedy in England before, but all the scripts that I'd read were too self-conscious, or too preachy, or too defensive, or whatever. Here, it was splendid because the author simply devised they were the heroine's best friends.
Oh, hi, Jane. What? Well, how far gone is she?
Listen. It's German for...
Jane's au pair's having a baby.
Listen, what do you do to revive someone who's fainted?
Just push the head between the knees.
Look, I know you're the doctor, but are you sure that's wise for a woman in labour?
Not the au pair, you Burke. Someone's fainted. Who's fainted?
Lawrence has fainted.
Michael, not now, please.
Look, I'm trying to get you ready.
The treatment of minorities in situation comedy is a difficult one because traditionally it's been easy to laugh at minorities. It's one of the roots of humor, to laugh at what you're slightly apprehensive of, and the human race is always apprehensive about minorities.
The black parents are here.
Good. How do they look?
You have to say, today is my birthday. I am happy. I am with my family. That is all that matters.
Today is my birthday. I'm happy. I'm with my family. That's all that matters.
We decided to make the black family in Mixed Blessings white-collar, middle class. Somebody said, oh, I saw the program and enjoyed it very much. It taught me a lot. I didn't know black people spoke like that. In other words, they'd never thought that in this country there were black people with educated accents.
I wanted to go with them.
No Problem, the first British comedy with an all-black cast, concerns a group of young Anglo-West Indians whose parents have retired to Jamaica.
Retired to Jamaica.
Yeah, man. Big J.
The first night of that in the studio was incredibly exciting because the audience, which was mostly young and perhaps three-quarters black, they were hearing language that nobody had put on the screen before.
2 big cherries and 1 big round.
That's enough.
Hey, what?
That's enough for your dirty talk.
1 big round piece of orange, man.
If you become aware that the only time people are seeing black faces are on the screen is in a program, in a documentary context, or it equals a problem, or there is crime going on, or whatever. In the entertainment area, we can actually do something to counter that. But I would never want to lay too much stress on that. The first responsibility of situation comedy is to entertain, is to make people laugh, without question.
There's something I don't understand about you, Sunshine. If you're the son of a chief, why are you called Smith?
Well, that's not my real name.
Of course it isn't. So what's your real name, then?
I can't tell you that. My real name is known only to the elders.
Oh.
You see, my people believe that if a man has your name, that he can harm you, that he can take your name and work evil with it.
Yeah, we got people like that in this country. We call them the police.
Rigby, you don't understand. Philip's name's Taboo.
Well, if his name's Taboo, why can't he say so and be so secretive about it?
I didn't know you were a photographer. I'm famous up and down every promenade in this country. I didn't know you were interested in it. I've always been interested in it. The trouble is, I've never had the time for it. When I found out I was getting too old for it, so I took up photography. Time! I had one of those guns once.
In Britain, in the early 60s, a new tradition of television comedy was taking shape.
Instead of comedy coming out of vaudeville and music hall, which it tended to do, I suppose, in the past, it was suddenly comedy coming out of universities. So it was, you know, sort of comparatively highly educated or quasi-educated people making the jokes.
Well, at the beginning of the 60s, there'd just been a cultural revolution in England. It started in 1956 with Look Back in Anger. That changed the theatre, that changed television theatre. It changed, at the same time, 4 people from Oxford and Cambridge were doing Beyond the Fringe.
Beyond the Fringe was heralded by critics as the renaissance of English satire when it opened in London's West End in May 1961. The show, a collection of songs, monologues and sketches, many of which lampooned sacred cows of the day, was written and performed by 4 graduates from University Review: Alan Bennett and Dudley Moore from Oxford, and Jonathan Miller and Peter Cook from Cambridge.
The 4 of us got together for the Edinburgh Festival, and we put a show together which we thought was funny, and that was the only intention of it. And one of the things I found funny was Harold Macmillan, and so I did him, and that was taken to be political satire.
They brought a healthy and helpful disrespect for some of the things for which we had an inbred respect, something that we couldn't fight.
And at the same time, I was starting a political cabaret club, The Establishment, where we were actually, that was the policy, was to be topical and satirical about things which were going on at the time. And we had an ideal Tory government to have fun with. And that, I think, led directly to That Was the Week on television.
That was the week that was. Nice blasted at your son. Put him in the self-same kind as Philip of Spain, the Kaiser, Hitler, and Napoleon. That was the
In this particular week, the British political establishment were outraged at suggestions by American Secretary of State Dean Acheson that Britain was no longer the world power it once was and still affected to be.
About this Acheson thing, Jack. It's Harold here. Harold Macmillan. M-A-C-R.
After the first night, which was really rather a sensation, newspaper reporters got on to the Postmaster General, Reg Bevins, and said, can any government stand for this sort of thing? Will you be doing something about it? And Reg Bevins was foolish enough to say, yes, I will. Next morning, when he got to his office, as I know from a senior post office civil servant, he found on his desk a 4-word memo from Harold Macmillan just saying, oh, no, you won't.
I'm calling from London. Now, looky here. This thing doesn't represent the views of your government, does it? Oh.
Now, I'm all for the establishment being questioned, etc., etc., but week in, week out, to attack every aspect of the establishment creates a sense of insecurity.
For God's sake, why can't we talk about politicians and figures in public life with the frankness we talk about our friends in private life, rather than with all this rubbish about the fact that they only went into politics to devote their lives to self-sacrifice?
Nonsense! Many of the greatest miracles of modern science stem from Britain. Radar, penicillin, the hovercraft, radar, the steam engine, penicillin, the spinning jenny, radar, and didn't Britain produce the great transistor valve?
No. Suddenly they announced that because there was an election coming the following year, and TW3 might have an effect on the election, it must be taken off the air for election year. Now, that's ludicrous, because the programme and all it stood for, pointing out the lies in public life and all of that, well, there are more lies in an election year than any other year.
TW3 was taken off the air in December 1963, but its success had generated competition.
Mr. Lou Grade, managing director of ATV, which produces ITV's Saturday satire show, On the Braden Beat, said, "We are continuing indefinitely with Bernard Braden."
Like TW3, On the Braden Beat took the week's news as raw material for comedy. In June 1965, the border wars between Pakistan and India were front-page headlines.
From what I've read, this Rann of Kutch is hardly worth fighting for.
Well, in summer it is saltwater marsh, and in winter it is a desert without water. No one in his right mind would fight over the Rann of Kutch.
Then you are saying that both India and Pakistan are out of their minds?
I never said that. I never said that. I could not. Did you hear me say? I never. Not one single word did I say such a thing. What?
Throw away that fur-lined chin strap and make a statement.
What is a jailbreak?
Answer, a break used for stopping jails.
Well, it broke the traditional, very rigid spectrum of pretty square humour. It was still Victorian. If you play any old radio show of that genre, like Itmar these days, you'd find it just isn't funny. So it was a great break. We actually did funny jokes.
My parents didn't like the Goon Show. They thought it's too loud and noisy and generally disturbing and stupid and lunatic, and it appealed to all the kids of my generation in any case.
I just went into total abstract comedy when I went onto television. I didn't try to do anything political of the day, anything social at all. I just went into abstract comedy madness, you know.
You've forgotten your trousers.
I never wear them. They go against my principles.
I see. They wear the skin off, do they? What's that? It wasn't me. Ah! It's the Uta for the end of the game. Right, you should give him a song off, would you? Right, Bill? Here, right. My Yiddish mama.
There's a feeling of anarchy in everybody, and I had my measure of it. And it was great fun. Putting somebody on is one of the attributes of the human race. If you can put somebody on, you will. We are a perverse species, especially me.
Seeing this show, you know, sitting with my mum and dad at home in Claygate watching these, watching the TV, I think, oh, the bastard, he's done it. He's actually taken comedy and changed it. He was doing more revolutionary things in comedy than anybody was doing in documentaries or any other drama.
Now,
it's...
In fact, I think if it wasn't for Spike, Python would never have happened in the form it did.
The first major thing the Pythons did, the most inventive thing, was to do away with the punchline, which is the hardest part of any sketch. And so by turning lack of punchlines into a joke,
it becomes an impulse to try to do something else, but maybe to do something different. In the same way, maybe the Goons were, you know, you saw that people could take the medium, and they took the medium of radio and changed it and exploded it and made it sort of wonderful and made it move and turned it, you know, plumbed its surreal depths, as it were. And I suppose with Python, we sort of kind of tried in a way to sort of do the same thing to television.
Monty Python's surreal visual ingenuity was anticipated on American television a decade or so earlier by the innovative comedy of Ernie Kovacs.
He was a genius. He would do things electronically that were brilliant. We borrowed whatever we could of the electronic part, but tried to go more and more for brevity.
Hey, my wife was supposed to come to the party tonight, but she's home with mononucleosis.
Oh, well, you'd better be careful, Dan. You just can't trust those Greek millionaires.
We had 13 marvelous writers, and the fact is that it was the first show that I can ever remember where there were no rules. There was no beginning, no middle, no end.
Tonight we're going to take a look at work.
Well, great. I'm all for that.
You mean work?
No looking at
I
it.
thought so. Did you ever have to work real hard at anything?
Well, once it took 2 dinners and a bottle of wine.
I mean pursuing something utilizing your full capacity that could result in an achievement providing great personal satisfaction. Ever do that?
Yeah, as I said, once it took 2 dinners and a bottle.
There was a program called The Laugh-In, which George Statter used to produce. And I remember dressing a conference in Denver once, and there were questions about that. And I ventured the suggestion that possibly The Laugh-In owed something to That Was the Week. And George Statter said, owed something to it? It was stolen from it entirely.
Our show was politically oriented, but we tried desperately to keep it balanced. And we had writers who were opposite ends of the pole. And so that it was really kept balanced. And Mr. Nixon was running for office and agreed to come on and say, "Sock it to me." He did this, and we offered the same opportunity to Hubert Humphrey, who turned it down. His advisors turned it down. And if you'll recall, Mr. Nixon only won by 1 million votes. A lot of people have accused us.
It was a party political commercial on behalf of the Republican Party.
His name is Ronald Reagan, and he's quite a guy.
With the savage caricatures of the spitting image puppets, political satire returned to British television in 1983, 20 years after the demise of That Was the Week That Was.
John Cleese once said to me that you don't get a strong satire show except when you've got a strong Conservative government. And I think that is true. The people who want to express themselves in terms of political comment need the provocation.
Oh, Dennis, I do think he's found the right girl. She has everything he needs. Money, even more money, and a compass.
Where the hell is it? Oh, bums!
What on earth are you looking for? The ring?
No, Westminster Abbey.
It's outside, you fool!
Oh!
Mark, come back here, you little brat!
The Spitting Image is the only programme on at the moment which is satirical. And I don't quite know why the only programme which is satirical should be done with puppets. But I suppose it's getting back to the oldest form of political attack, which has been cartoons.
Holy Father, he is here.
Who?
Bigger J.
Big who?
Bigger J.
Hey, you're kidding. Jack is here in Rome.
Oh, Jesus, he is back.
Jesus. Jesus who?
Jesus Christ!
Hey, don't get angry, man. Just tell me Jesus who. Uh-oh. You mean Jesus? Oh, my God. He's gonna want to see the book.
Yes, sir.
He's just accounting with him? Cancel my master charge. Sell the Pope Mobile and buy me a Renault 4. I want him to think I've been suffering.
Good comedy, I think, anticipates. The Goon Show anticipated what has become Monty Python. For example, Hancock's Half Hours, a sitcom, anticipated the great sitcoms. Till Death Is Two Part anticipated freedom in broadcasting, freedom of subject matter.
It's always at least 10 to 20 years behind the times. Right into the 60s, we were working on a kind of 1940s British film representation of domestic life. It has no relevance at all.
What's that?
A rail of cotton.
And that?
A watermelon.
And that?
A wee speck of dirt.
Right in. Not bad at all. You!
Yes, sir.
What's this?
A map.
There are just so many car chases you can do, and there are just, so many men getting shot that you can see before it starts to be the same. Comedy can always be new and refreshing and different, and people do want to laugh. So I think it's going to be around forever.
Okay, you bozos. I cleaned all your filthy graffiti off the walls of the can. And I want you to know what you wrote about me in there was disgusting. Some of it ain't even true.
You should see what's written about you on the walls of the ladies' room.
I know what it says in there. I wrote it.
Comedy can deal with subjects that probably wouldn't get an audience with a straight documentary sometimes. You can deal with topics that and put that sugarcoating of humor on top of it, but it doesn't make the message any less real.
Anglo Chemicals is at 47.5, thanks to napalm. I bought it at 39, and my United Foundry's up too. They're coming out with a new automatic rifle.
Betting on destruction to win, place, and show?
I've got a family to think of. I've got to leave them something in case I get killed.
Frank, the only way you're going to get killed is if you operate on yourself.
And maybe it's a function of comedy just to push the boundaries of taste a little bit, or to even sort of make people consider what is taste. And sort of, I think what comedy can do maybe is make people ask questions about themselves. I don't think it'll ever get over ideas or concepts particularly, but at least it can sort of make people question what on earth they really think and believe in.
Well, there we are, the President of the United States, ladies and gentlemen. Stay and have a short chat with us, won't you, sir?
Why, I'd be glad to, Dean. And first of all, let me say I've always been a big fan of yours.
Next week, how the real politicians have used television to project an image. And a second program, Television in the Future, homes with 50 channels.
Henry James's best-selling novel, The Europeans, the story of rich Americans and their European cousins, is next online in the movie starring Lee Remick, followed by cricket highlights of the day's play from Brisbane.